Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today we have a very exciting episode because we're going to be talking about rumination revisited. And the holiday season is a time where typically people from our community may experience more adverse feelings and thoughts. And while people around us can experience festive cheer and look forward to family get-togethers, it's a time where we can be affected by different challenges we experience, namely through sibling estrangement or chaotic relationships with other family members. And one such way that we're affected by is rumination. And today we're going to be exploring what it is about this difficult topic that gets us going as much and how we can best navigate through rumination during the holidays. So I'm here today with Fern Schumer Chapman, and I'm so happy that you're here with us to be able to contribute to this conversation for our viewers. Thanks for being here, Fern.
Thanks. Thanks, Ollie John, and I guess I should say happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays.
Rumination is somewhat unique, I think, to sibling estrangement or estrangement of any sort. There is a tendency to engage in loop thinking and constantly ask yourself, what did I do? What's my role in this? How can I fix it? And it can really terrorize you and really take hold of your brain and not release you. And I know a lot of people feel it particularly at the holidays. Rumination reaches a kind of zenith at this time of year. From October to December, the aggressive spread of holiday cheer only seems to worsen the suffering. And even well-meaning happy holidays can twist the knife for those of us who are estranged.
You know, you're absolutely right, and you're absolutely right. I think that's the thing that happens with a number of our viewers and such, you know, people in our community, because it's this single type of narrative that dominates over time, right? And that's one of the things that makes holidays more difficult for people is that they see this type of narration going around, you know, in terms of what they see and hear, and it really puts people in contrast with their own feelings, right? They feel like the odd person out because of that, right?
Well, and there's all that, of course, that fantasy of everybody else is having a wonderful holiday, and here I am sitting in my living room looking at the tree by myself.
Yep, exactly. So I think that a lot of times there's these types of challenges that arise, and I think that it's something that happens also is a thought that comes up is how do we navigate the idea of going somewhere that may be potentially unpredictable or volatile with our estranged sibling present? Because for some of us, that sometimes is still happens, right? It's not all of us that have a complete cutoff. Sometimes we'll have that estrangement that's there, but also it kind of carries on. And every single time we're faced with the holidays coming up, you know, there's this type of issue that comes up. So I find that, you know, people have that balance of wanting to kind of sometimes go to a family function, but they also want to kind of have that experience of safety, you know, and they don't really want to give into the narration that their sibling can attempt to build.
Yeah, there's rumination about the loss of the relationship, but then there's also the rumination and the dread of actually seeing that person. And you can spend an awful lot of times prior to that holiday gathering thinking to yourself, you know, what will she be like? How am I going to feel? How am I going to deal with her?
Exactly, right? And it's always about trying to be ourselves ultimately, I think, in all this, right? And I think that oftentimes what happens, right, it's that these old family dynamics can potentially prevail if we're not careful, you know? So families can sometimes create enabling situations, we'll say, you know, in which a family member is permitted or allowed to exercise bullying, coercion, dominance, or even the silent treatment I've seen in some of our support groups, you know? So for some of us, it's a reminder that certain situations can play themselves out in an unhealthy way, especially when there's pressure to attend by parents, for example, or if we're feeling nostalgic with family.
Yeah, there's also, yeah, a lot of ganging up. There's also what we've discussed in other episodes, the toxic positivity, where you need to get on board and make sure it looks like what their narrative is, which is positive and wonderful and happy, even though you may not feel it's any of those things.
Exactly, right? And that's a good point you make with toxic positivity. I think that that's something that would be of benefit to our viewers if they haven't seen that video already, you know. And I think that in some ways also there's for other people, it's also a harsh reminder that there is no family, right? And at least not in the way that they know it. So when people make plans without us, for example, we're forced to experience a reality of alienation and estrangement that can be overwhelming and difficult to handle, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of self-gaslighting in all of this, and particularly in the rumination, where you've actually internalized some of the abuse and you don't even realize it, and you end up caught in believing what they say. So that's this kind of self-gaslighting. Maybe things aren't so bad, which again, a big line in toxic positivity. Or she didn't really mean that, or maybe I deserve to be treated like this. And those lines are all about self-gaslighting. And you have to be really mindful if you're going to these holiday gatherings that you're not doing what they do to you to yourself.
Exactly, and that's one of the things we were talking about in one recent support group. It was this idea of trying to be yourself, right? How do you continue to be yourself instead of being reactionary to that particular dynamic that's going on in the family, right? That's the
Especially
challenge.
especially when there is a tendency to regress. These are people you've had long-standing relationships with, and you remember those fights when you were 10 and 12, and you tend to start to relate without your awareness in that pattern.
Yep, exactly. It can be long-standing, like you say. Like it could be based on different incidences that have happened that have somehow poured into all these other areas where the awkwardness kind of thrives and makes for difficult situations because of that, because people tiptoe around it, right?
The holidays are really a minefield for those who are estranged.
Very much so, yes. So I think that this is good for us to talk about because it kind of leads us into memory and identity when we talk about this, you and I. And sometimes when we're just before recording, you and I go into some of these philosophical conversations about all this, right? And I think that it's really, really interesting to see how rumination is sparked often by memory and identity, right? And there's like this need to correct things that happened to us in the past, and this marked insistence that these ghosts of our past want to be acknowledged, and that we want to have peace from these ghosts, right?
Well, or they're marked by euphoric recall, with this idea that things are, you see them through rose-colored glasses, that, oh, they weren't really that bad. They were much better than I'm remembering. And of course, again, that plays into the self-gaslighting.
Yes, absolutely. That's very true. And it's really important to be careful about that, right? And I think that it's really, really interesting to see how this can play on our memory because there's often this perception of this back and forth, how things were the before, as I like to call it, versus how they are now, the after, so to speak. So, and this is what kind of causes us to experience rumination in some cases. It's our need to have a sense of belonging and nostalgia for what once was, like you're saying, euphoric recall, right? And this shakes us up when it comes to different things because we're faced with volatility, hostility, and progressive or sudden absence. And the thing that happens with this is that this rumination fuels situations of hostility or dysfunction in the family as well.
We're so resistant to accepting what the relationships really are that we tend to deny it, or we fantasize what it could be, or we wish it would be. And underneath all of that is this terrible sense of loss. And that loss is the loss of identity. Because if you are no longer a sister or a brother, and maybe no longer an aunt or uncle, this is, who are you? This is you have lost a lot of roles.
Absolutely, and I think that that's the thing that plays on people's minds is that with sibling estrangement, they're forced to experience incompleteness in the narratives of their lives, and you and I are no strangers to this, that's happened to us, and it's this question of identity and memory or lack of it that fuels the meaning or indifference that we experience, right? And that's really what's important when it comes to this. You take away the memory, all of a sudden it doesn't affect us as much, whereas it's the memory that lingers that keeps on affecting us.
I always think about how we are driven to have a sense of belonging, because in ancient times, if you did not have a group, you did not survive. So it's in our DNA to feel we need to belong.
Absolutely. This is a very deep core need that we have as people. And whether our siblings are present or not, it's especially important for us. So let's get into what we can do first. Let's look at what it is that we can, of course, do in such cases like that. What do you start with, especially on your end?
Well, I think being alone is dangerous for people who are ruminating. So I would encourage our viewers to call a friend and talk about anything but the thoughts that are troubling you. Get out, exercise, be in nature. Those are things that alter your feelings and experience. There was a 2014 study that found a 90-minute nature walk did more for those who ruminate than almost anything else. They reported fewer symptoms of rumination. And another 2008 study determined that a single session of exercise reduced symptoms of rumination. So for an optimal result, do both together. Get out and exercise in nature.
Absolutely. And I would agree with you that distraction is key, right? You want to learn to interrupt your ruminating thoughts by doing something different, like an activity that's in contrast to what you're thinking about, right? And this is what fosters psychological detachment. And I agree with you. Walking is great. It's great for physical reasons, but it's also great for mental reasons because it clears our minds and we can actually get into wonderment often, which is one of the ingredients I find which helps to get us out of depressive thoughts and thinking, especially.
Right. And if you're ruminating, by the way, it's often caused by anxiety and depression or old traumas that are being activated.
It's important that we consider that. It's important that people recognize, where is this coming from? What is the fuel that is making this appear? So be clear about what your rumination style is. That's something I say to people. If you tend to brood about your feelings from the past, consider that you're feeding the animal, of course, and seeing what it is that makes it worse. Because I think that if you look at how it is that you ruminate, if you kind of focus too much on negative feelings, what you're doing is you're not really doing anything with it. And the research seems to be showing us essentially that, if you try to gain more insight about yourself, you're actually helping yourself in the future. You're helping your future self. And when you tend to do this, as we've done before, by asking people, what have you learned from this? Then you're not a victim, because you've basically made it into something that's educational for yourself, right?
Right. Yeah, you see so often on the page people saying, educate yourself, learn about these things, learn about narcissism and sibling estrangement. And you don't feel so caught off guard when you have knowledge. And speaking of which, that brings me to another interesting study, which the National Science Foundation reported that the average brain generates 15,000 to 50,000 thoughts daily, and most of them are negative, and up to 90% of them are repetitive. So it's really important to challenge those negative thoughts. What do I mean by that? This comes into that whole concept we've talked about before of the third eye, where you actually are becoming more and more aware of how you respond to things, and check yourself when you see that negative response or that negative thought.
Yeah, I completely agree, right? It's important to be able to objectify, like you say, right, with the third eye, and to recognize that you can go into problem solving as well. Because when you go into problem solving with your feelings, then you gain an increased confidence in yourself, which will in turn increase the likelihood of the attainment of your goals as well, right? So you're not just dwelling on feelings, you're actually being able to somehow interact with them to get beyond them, right?
Right, you have a greater sense of control, and a sense that you can actually manage the situation rather than just being battered about by your feelings.
Exactly. And when it comes to incompleteness with our sibling estrangement, which is something that happens to a lot of us, right? It's important for us to focus on creating different outcomes for ourselves, like you're saying earlier, making a plan, filling in the gaps, so that you can experience more of a sense of moving forward towards doing something about it, as opposed to staying put with the incompleteness of our situation. Because if we stay put with it, then we're fostering more rumination and we're having paralyzing depressive thoughts when it comes to that, right?
And it's important to recognize too that rumination is rooted in low self-esteem. And so it's important to see what you can do to feel good about yourself and what activities you can engage in which make you feel confident.
Exactly, right? And the what can we do differently question is such an important question, right? Because like you said, it helps us to fill that gap, and it leads us to possibilities in terms of boosting our self-esteem, right? Like you were saying, and I think that it builds self-assuredness, which in turn will help to counter rumination as well. So it's so important for our viewers, of course, to learn to ask that magic question, because it really does open us up to possibilities, you know?
And along those lines, identifying your triggers so that you're not constantly caught off guard and blindsided by them. And that will help you control the rumination.
Yes, very much. You're absolutely right. You know, so I think that we've talked a lot about this today, and I'm just looking at the time. We're going to have to end it on this note, but let's talk about resources, Fern. You know, I think that we've talked about rumination before, and we've done a full circle today about that. So let's talk about how it is that what type of resources are out there that we've been creating to help people precisely with rumination and other topics. What's your number one resource right now?
Well, I would say if you are ruminating, finding a good therapist would help. And Ali John, you are that, or a coach. And I do one-on-one coaching and certainly discuss a lot of what we've talked about here with some of the clients to stop some of this very plaguing thought pattern.
I absolutely agree. I think it's important that people reach out and seek help for this. And there's few resources out there when it comes to sibling estrangement. And that's what we're trying to do, both you and I, to be able to help people, of course, get further and beyond the obstacles that present themselves in their lives. My number one resource right now, I have to say, is the support group at this time. The support group is very important when it comes to boosting ourselves and breaking isolation and being able to essentially just feel better about ourselves, because we're creating a circle where there's a feeling of empowerment that builds from that. And there's like-minded people that understand exactly what we're going through. And it's all done in an atmosphere of respect and confidentiality. So this is really one of those groups that I'm able to offer online that brings people together from all parts of the world with a common goal. So I'm very happy to be able to do this and to create that space that helps to, of course, give people more in the end, of course.
It's really helpful to attend that kind of group during the holidays so you don't feel so alone.
Very much so, yes. Very important. So thank you so much for doing this, Fern. It's wonderful. I think this has been a very empowering video for our community, and I'm certain that people will get a lot out of it. So I always appreciate us coming together like this and being able to go further into this topic that affects so many people in our community. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Okay, you take care, Fern.
I know.
Happy holidays, by the way.
Thank you.